Longshot stars CHARLIZE THERON, Seth Rogen, DIANE RAPHAEL, RAVI PATEL and O'Shea Jackson Jr. The movie is written by Dan Sterling and Liz Hanna. Cinematography is by YVES BÉLANGER, and music is by BELTRAMI and Hankins. Longshot is directed by JONATHAN LEVINE, the man who directed 50/50 and Warm Bodies. What's the story? Anton Koval plays a neo-Nazi group leader. He gives a hate speech to his followers in his apartment. Amongst the shaved head Nazis is Fred Flarsky, played by Seth Rogen. Fred clearly does not belong with the group, but he is pretending to be a new member because Fred is a journalist and he wants a story. Fred is secretly recording the audio on his phone. The spotlight is thrown on Fred as he's introduced as a new member. Fred stumbles through a half-hearted speech about liking Nazis and hating Jews. Later on, Fred is forced to get a swastika tattoo. However, the tattoo is not completed because the Nazi leader produces a laptop with Fred's image on it, showing that he is a reporter, a Jewish reporter. Fred is forced to make a quick exit. He jumps out of a second-story window onto a car. Fred is injured, but he still manages to hobble away, while the Nazis shout at him from the window above. The TV news shows a stock footage of the American Secretary of State, Charlotte Field, played by CHARLIZE THERON. Charlotte is the Pulitzer Prize-winning protege of President Chambers. Two Wembley News anchormen, played by Kurt Braunholer and Paul Scheer, discuss how hot she looks. Obviously this is completely inappropriate, but their female co-anchor, played by Claudia O'Doherty, laughs it off, this time. We follow the real Charlotte home. It's late at night and she has a series of calls with various people discussing a bill she's trying to push through. Charlotte runs herself a bath, but she falls asleep and floods the bathroom. It's a scene intended to show us how hard she works. The next day Charlotte gets up early and starts all over again. During one phone conversation we hear that the President has his own TV show, which has picked up 6 Golden Globe nominations. In the next scene we meet President Chambers, played by Bob Odenkirk. He is a vain person who likes nothing better than to watch his own TV show, in which he plays a president facing tough decisions. In fact, he loves show business so much he wants to ditch the presidency and try to become a movie star. President Chambers calls Charlotte into the Oval Office and gives her the news. He also tells Charlotte that he intends to endorse her nomination to be president after him. Charlotte immediately gets to work and hires consultants to run her PR campaign. A consultant called Catherine, played by Lisa Kudrow, runs through Charlotte's statistics. Charlotte's looking pretty good across the board, but a sense of humour needs work. Maggie Millikin, played by Diane Raphael, is Charlotte's assistant. Maggie tells Charlotte that she will look for some speechwriters who have a flair for comedy. Also in the room is another of Charlotte's assistants, Tom, played by Ravi Patel. Catherine next suggests that it would be good for Charlotte to be seen campaigning for something which she feels passionate about. This is a perfect opportunity for Charlotte to jumpstart the environment bill she's been working on. Catherine then points out that if Charlotte could start dating someone of importance, it would boost her popularity. Catherine refers to the stir online that was caused when Charlotte was seen with the Canadian Prime Minister, James Stewart, played by Alexander Skarsgård. Finally, Catherine shows stock footage of Charlotte waving. Her arm is all over the place and it doesn't look normal at all. Charlotte promises to work on the wave. Fred meets with his editor, Boss, played by Randall Park. Fred is told that his paper has just been bought by the media conglomerate, Wembley Media. Fred sees this as a disaster because Wembley Media is just a propaganda machine and it represents everything his paper was supposed to be against. Fred particularly hates Parker Wembley because he says ludicrous things such as hurricanes are caused by gay marriage. Rather than toe the line, Fred resigns from the paper. Fred starts ringing around other papers in case there might be an opening with them. Fred also goes to see his best friend Lance, played by O'Shea Jackson Jr. Lance is something of an achiever. He runs a business that has many employees. When Fred turns up, he gives everyone in the office the day off, just so they can leave him with Fred. Lance tells Fred they are going to spend the day playing in the park, and after a slap-up meal, Lance will take Fred to a worldwide Fun for Nature benefit to see Boys to Men. That night at the WWF benefit, Charlotte, Maggie and Tom arrive. Charlotte briefly bumps into James Stewart, but their flirting is interrupted when Boys to Men start to sing. There are 3 of the original 4 members, Nathan Morris, Vanya Morris and Sean Stockman. Across the room, Fred and Lance enjoy the show. Fred still hasn't changed his clothes from earlier, and he looks completely out of place in his purple and yellow shell suit jacket and cargo pants. Lance notices that Charlotte is looking at Fred strangely. Fred is forced to confess to Lance that he knows Charlotte. It turns out they used to be neighbours, and Charlotte used to babysit Fred. A short flashback scene shows us Fred and Charlotte as teenagers, played by Braxton Herder and Aviva Mongilo. Charlotte reads a speech she has written on recycling in preparation for a student election, while Fred looks on adoringly. As Fred talks with Lance, they are interrupted when Secret Service Agent M, played by Tristan D. Lalla, asks Fred to speak with Charlotte. When Fred arrives, Charlotte starts by saying that she can't shake the feeling that she knows him. Fred introduces himself and Charlotte does actually remember him. Fred goes on to compliment Charlotte for everything she's achieved. Their conversation is interrupted by Parker Wembley, played by Andy Serkis. Charlotte admits to Fred that she hates Wembley, which resonates with Fred because he has just lost his job because of him. Charlotte pretends to be nice to Wembley for appearance's sake. It seems that Wembley has been trying to schedule a meeting with Charlotte for some time. Charlotte is called away, so she says goodbye to Fred. This gives Fred the time he needs to build up the courage to verbally attack Wembley. He tells Wembley that he represents everything that is wrong with the country and his media conglomerate is ruining the planet. Fred takes his leave, but he trips on the stairs and faceplants on the floor. On the way home, Charlotte, Maggie and Tom rewatch Fred's faceplant on Tom's phone. Maggie asks how Charlotte knows Fred. When she learns that Charlotte used to babysit for Fred, Maggie comments, "Time has not been kind." Tom comes to Fred's defence and comments that Fred is a good writer. Tom does some research on his phone, and when they realise that Wembley has just bought Fred's paper, they understand why Fred was so mad with Wembley. Back home, Charlotte reads articles online that Fred has written. She's impressed at Fred's writing skills and humour. Charlotte takes samples into her office the next day, and she proposes Fred as one of the candidates to be her speechwriter. Maggie feels that this may be a reckless move, but she gives Fred a call. Maggie arranges the meeting and sends a car for Fred. Fred encounters a problem at the security cordon. He empties his pockets and produces a variety of drugs and other paraphernalia. Surprisingly, security still allows Fred into the building. Maggie asks Fred to sign a non-disclosure agreement. Once done, Charlotte explains that the president will not be seeking re-election and that he is going to endorse her to be the next president of the United States. Charlotte is headed to an environmental summit in Sweden, where she will be announcing that the world's heaviest polluters have just signed an environmental deal to combat sea levels, deforestation and protection of bees. This will be known as the Global Rehabilitation Initiative, aka Bees, Seas and Trees. Once Charlotte has gotten 100 countries to sign on, she will resign as Secretary of State and announce her bid for the presidency. Fred is asked to help punch up Charlotte's speeches with some comedy, but Fred is not sure about the job. He asks if Bees, Seas and Trees is an initiative that will actually do something, or if it will end up getting watered down. After Charlotte promises Fred that her initiative will save the planet, Fred agrees to the job. On Charlotte's plane, Fred disturbs Charlotte when she is micro-napping with her eyes open. Fred shows Charlotte some of his jokes, but they are a bit too angry to use. Fred suggests that it might be a good idea to use some of Charlotte's personal experiences, at the same time as throwing in some nostalgia and pop culture references. Fred and Charlotte talk about old times and have a laugh. As Fred leaves, Charlotte tells Fred that he can help write the main speech if he wants. Fred likes the idea. In Sweden, Tom briefs Charlotte on her hectic itinerary, while she reads a draft of Fred's speech. At the hotel, Charlotte asks Fred if he has any grown-up clothes, because he has been wearing the same clothes for days. Maggie announces that she will pick out some clothes for Fred to wear. On the evening, everyone cracks up when Fred turns up wearing a traditional Swedish suit, which looks similar to a Bavarian lederhosen costume. This is Maggie's not-so-subtle way of telling Fred that he should have bought a proper suit to wear. Fred asks if Charlotte likes his speech. Charlotte tells him that it will be fine if India and China agree to sign up to the deal. This shocks Fred because he was under the impression that India and China had already signed up to the deal. Later on, Fred has a smoke outside. Maggie interrupts and asks Fred to change the speech because India would not go for the seas part of the deal. Fred refuses to change his speech. Maggie is actually happy. She sees this as an opportunity to get rid of Fred, and she goes off to rewrite the speech herself. Fred causes a scene by chasing Maggie into a grand dining hall where there is a state dinner going on, so that he can steal his laptop from the podium in the corner of the room. Charlotte leaves the dinner to go and find out what's going on. Fred complains to Charlotte about losing the seas part of the deal. Charlotte responds by saying that until you're running the game, you have to play the game. The argument is interrupted when they both look up and see the Aurora Borealis, or Northern Lights. It's so pretty, Fred starts to cry. Later on, Charlotte gives Fred's speech, and it is very well received. The press dubs it the underdog speech. This inspires Fred to continue working for Charlotte. As Fred has used up everything he knows about Charlotte in his first speech, he asks to get to know Charlotte better, so he can write more about her. Fred asks Charlotte if she has any hobbies or favourite tea shows. We learn that as Charlotte doesn't have time to watch TV, she reads synopses of shows like Games of Thrones and award contender movies, etc. Further conversations are played out as Fred and Charlotte start a 20-country world tour in order to garner more support for the initiative. They have a good time talking about things, and it is clear they enjoy each other's company. Charlotte's tour is talked about in the media. Again, the Wembley News anchormen provide more sexist remarks about Charlotte, to the increasing disgust of their female co-anchor. While in Russia, Fred introduces Charlotte to movies from the Marvel Cinematic Universe. They watch Captain America, the Winter Soldier, in Russian. This is not a problem for Charlotte because she speaks Russian. Fred and Charlotte eventually end up in the Philippines, which at this time is going through a period of political instability. Fred asks if Charlotte is dating the Canadian Prime Minister. Charlotte admits to a brief fling, but they are not dating. Charlotte goes on to complain that she can't find love because no one wants to follow her around the world and hope that she has 5 minutes to be affectionate. This intimate moment is broken when an explosion goes off nearby. The insurgents are fighting the army. Agent M leads Fred and Charlotte down the hallways as explosions go off all around them. The couple is eventually locked in a secure room. Fred is hyper, and Charlotte has to teach him how to calm down by breathing slowly. When things calm down, Fred admits that he has had the best few weeks of his life. Charlotte feels the same, and they kiss. Just then, Agent M bursts in. He has arranged for a helicopter to take them to an island hotel. Charlotte asks Fred to come into her room to work on a speech, but this is just an excuse to have sex. Later on, Charlotte notices the weird tattoo on Fred's arm. It seems that Fred has drawn a stickman over the partially completed Nazi tattoo on his arm. The following day, Fred calls Lance up to give him the news. Fred believes this may be the first time in his life he has actually been happy. Lance tells Fred to tell himself that he is worthy of love. At another social event in Argentina, Fred turns up in a tuxedo and Charlotte is impressed. As Charlotte goes off to meet some important people, Maggie tells Fred that she knows what is going on between Fred and Charlotte. Maggie also tells Fred that the public will never accept the two of them together. Wembley is at the event. When he tries to arrange another meeting with Charlotte, Charlotte finally comes clean and admits that she has been avoiding him, and she has no intention of scheduling a meeting with him. Charlotte next bumps into James Stewart. He agrees to sign Canada up to Charlotte's initiative if he gives her a dance. They danced Por una cabeza, the famous tango song written in 1935 by Carlos Gardel. It's a familiar tune used in various movies such as Scent of a Woman, Schindler's List and True Lies. As Fred watches the couple dance, Maggie whispers to Fred that Charlotte and Stewart make a much better couple. This is highlighted by the fact that the dance floor clears to allow Stewart and Charlotte to continue dancing, and when they stop, everyone applauds. Fred is left alone chanting, "I am worthy of love," to himself. Later on, Fred slips Charlotte a note, and they end up alone in the kitchen. Fred asks Charlotte to dance to a recording of It Must Have Been Love by ROGEN, which just so happens to be Charlotte's favourite song. They end up sleeping together again. When Fred slips back to his room afterward, Fred spots Maggie coming out of Tom's room. They are sleeping together too. When Charlotte and the others get to France, Charlotte gets a call over the computer from the President. The President asks for more information about Charlotte's environmental treaty. Charlotte responds by saying that the paperwork has been on his desk for the last 3 weeks. What the President actually wants is for Charlotte to kill the tree part of the initiative. Later on, Charlotte tries to pick up the pieces with her team. While Maggie tries to be optimistic, Charlotte is angry because she actually cared about the initiative, but what else can Charlotte do? She needs the President's endorsement for her presidential campaign. Left alone with Fred, Charlotte confesses that she doesn't want to do her job anymore because what she does always gets undone. Charlotte wants to go out and get wasted on drink and drugs. They spend a night in the club getting high. Unfortunately, Charlotte is called out of the club to go and solve a diplomatic incident. She turns up at the American embassy with shades on and glitter in her hair. She is forced to make a call to the Kashgari secretary, Barath, played by Aladdin Tawfiq, because an American pilot has been shot down over his airspace in a spy plane. Charlotte is spaced out on drugs. She lights up a cigarette and disappears under a table to talk to Barath on the phone. She confesses that her boss, the President, is a jerk and his TV show is stupid. She also promises a special gift package for Barath if he sends the pilot back home. Later on, TV news shows the repatriated American pilot meeting and thanking Charlotte for her efforts on his behalf. Charlotte uses this opportunity to announce to the world that the President has fully backed her environmental initiative, which is clearly not the case. Back home in America, Maggie wants to run some new polls by Charlotte. On her computer, Maggie shows the results of having asked 1,000 people what they would think if Princess Diana started dating Guy Fieri, or if Kate Middleton started dating Danny DeVito. This is Maggie's attempt at saying that Charlotte dating Fred is going to make her presidential campaign challenging. She even suggests that Fred could be ushered in and out of secret tunnels to the White House, etc. Charlotte gets angry and states that her dating Fred is not something that requires Maggie's approval. When Charlotte eventually catches up to the President, she ends up with a meeting with Wembley. It appears that Wembley and the President have invested in a server farm in Alaska, and the tree section of Charlotte's initiative threatens it. Wembley and the President ask Charlotte to drop the trees, or they will release the content of Fred's hacked-into hard drive. This includes footage of Fred masturbating on a webcam. When Charlotte meets with Fred later on, she tells him that she has dropped the trees. Fred is disgusted and they get into an argument over how and when to compromise. They also talk about how and when they should present Fred as Charlotte's partner to the rest of the world. When Fred figures out that the cleaned up image of Fred Charlotte wants to present to the world is not actually the real Fred, he is not able to agree. The next day, Fred complains about his situation to Lance. Fred doesn't understand how Charlotte can work with both Democrat and Republican politicians. Fred hates Republicans, and this upsets Lance because he is a Republican, and Fred never knew. Fred also takes exception to Lance wearing a cross and praying to God. It's not precisely clear why Fred takes exception to these things. The ultimate lesson from this scene is that Lance tells Fred to see things from Charlotte's perspective. Charlotte, meanwhile, is back dating. She meets with Stewart in a restaurant, but there is no magic there, and she doesn't accept Stewart's invitation to go back to his room. Fred calls Charlotte up and leaves a message to say that he will accept being kept a secret so long as it means that he can continue to be with her. However, the next day, Charlotte is still not convinced that she should continue to date Fred. She agrees that Maggie was right. Her relationship with Fred was never going to work. The next day, Fred meets Lance in a bar. They both prepare to watch Charlotte announce her campaign to run for presidency. She starts with a joke that Fred wrote. However, as Charlotte continues with her speech, Charlotte becomes compelled to tell everyone that she is being blackmailed by Wembley and the president, and then she drops a microphone and leaves the stage. Lance tells Fred to go across town and find Charlotte. They both jump in a taxi. During the trip, Lance discovers that the video of Fred masturbating has been released and it has gone viral. By the time Fred gets home, Charlotte is waiting for him. Charlotte tells Fred that she loves him. In reply, Fred tells Charlotte that he has been in love with her since he was 12 years old. Fred and Charlotte go outside to say hello to the press and the crowd. Charlotte introduces Fred to everyone as her boyfriend, and she announces that Fred will be with her on the campaign trail. Cut to, Charlotte is sworn in as the first female president of the United States. Cut to, the two Wembley news anchormen ask if the nation really wants a woman to have her hand on the nuclear button when it is that time of the month. This is the final straw for the female co-anchor. She hits one of the men on the head with a microphone and leaves the set. Cut 2. Fred speaks to the camera during an interview in the White House. He shows us a cartoonish portrait of himself hung on the wall next to other famous American First Ladies. In a subsequent interview, Fred shows us an elaborated version of his tattoo that refers to him as the first husband. Fred also jokes that the best part about being the first husband is that he has been told who killed Kennedy. Issues. When Fred jumps out of the second-story window to avoid the Nazis, why doesn't anyone follow him? The Nazis don't have to jump out the window, they could just use the stairs. Fred is injured and he is hobbling away at a slow pace. The Nazis could have caught up to him in 2 minutes. Charlotte was supposed to wave an awkward wave. It gets a laugh initially, but it's a bit too ridiculous to consider plausible. Why does Charlotte need to hire a consultant to teach her how to wave her arm? And where was the payoff? The wave was referenced twice and then forgotten about. Charlotte had a perfect opportunity to demonstrate her wave at the end of the movie when speaking to the press, but the writers didn't use it. Bearing in mind Fred's hatred of Wembley, it was a little strange that Fred didn't immediately argue with him when he ran into Wembley at the WWF benefit. Wembley had just lost Fred his job, so why did he try to be polite to him? Especially as Fred mentions that he's just lost his job. Yes, Fred does verbally attack him shortly afterward, but I was surprised that this was not Fred's immediate reaction to meeting Wembley. Why does Wembley try so hard to secure a meeting with Charlotte if he already had private and exclusive access to the president? Wembley has the only connection that matters, and if he needed something from Charlotte, why didn't he just ask the president to get Charlotte to give it to him? And this wasn't about the trees, because Wembley was after a meeting long before Charlotte even started the environmental initiative. Fred's rant to Lance about Democrats, Republicans and God seemed a bit weird. How can a journalist be so one-sided? Fred is demonstrating the same bias the Nazis have in the beginning scene. It didn't feel like this scene fitted with Fred's persona at all. I was disappointed in Charlotte's final speech, the one where she tells everyone that she's been blackmailed by Wembley and the president. This is Charlotte's showdown moment, and therefore the most important speech of the movie. What we ended up with was something that was crude and rudimentary. I expected better. Review. Longshot has lots of cursing and drug references, but it still works well as a romantic comedy. Not only this, it's actually an interesting insight into the hectic life of politicians and the battles they face to compromise on policy decisions. Charlize Theron is great, and Seth Rogen is perfectly acceptable. The other characters are a bit one-dimensional, but this is a silly romantic comedy, and not a tense drama, so that's okay. The cinematography is fine, and the movie has a good soundtrack. I especially like listening to Boyz II Men. My rating? 86%. Hi, this is Mike Kendall, and thanks for watching my video. I'd like to know what you thought of this movie. Was it a hit? Was it a flop? Let me know your thoughts and rating in the comments section. You can also tell me what other movies you'd like to see reviews for. Please like and subscribe, and remember to hit that notification bell for all my new videos. Sharing these videos on Facebook and Twitter would help me out a lot. I'd sure appreciate it. Don't forget to check out the other videos on my channel. We're adding more all the time. I'm off to see a movie. You have a great day, and I'll see you in the next video.